Have you ever met somebody famous and not recognized them and not realized that you were meeting somebody famous? A couple of years ago, Victoria and I went out and we were having a date night. We went out to dinner. We went to this nice place downtown, and we got seated in kind of this back room. You had to kind of go around the main dining room, down this hallway, and I don't know how we ended up in this back room, but it felt very exclusive and very fancy, and it was just kind of fun. And while we're eating dinner, I'm facing the doorway. There's kind of one doorway, main doorway into this place, and one out in this room where we are. And I'm facing that doorway, and this couple walks in. It's a man and a woman, and I kind of look for a second, and I'm thinking, that person looks kind of familiar. And then I start noticing that heads start turning, and they look at this couple, and I start seeing iPhone cameras flash and light up. It's kind of this dark room, so there's a bunch of flashes. And as they walk by, and it was the man, by the way, that everyone seemed to be paying attention to. And as they walk by, I'm just looking, trying to figure out, who is that? Who are you? And he gives me one of these. Now, women, you might not understand this, but guys, we know there's this unwritten code. You greet a friend with a nod up. You greet someone else you don't know to be respectful with a nod down to say hello, right? He gives me one of these, and I say, I don't know who you are, but I guess we're friends. So I give him one of those back. And they go and sit down, and there's some people kind of like who stream over. It looks like he's signing some things. They're taking pictures, and I'm like, Victoria, I don't know who this is. And she's thinking the same thing. And we're talking to each other, and we're like, he looks too short to be a basketball player, not like built enough, not broad enough to be a football player, but he does look like an athlete, so we're just really unsure. We had no idea. It wasn't until like months later we were telling some friends about this, and they're like, oh, that was Donovan Mitchell, I guarantee you. Donovan Mitchell was a player for the Utah Jazz, now plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I could have met Donovan Mitchell, but I didn't recognize him, which was unfortunate. But I think what's funny about this question, have you met someone famous and not realized it, is there's probably a higher chance than you realize that it's happened to you. Because how would you know? You might have just moved right through the situation and never realized it because you didn't recognize them, or you were looking for somebody else. Like, I thought Donovan Mitchell, a basketball player, would be a little bit taller than me. He's about my height. You know, the average basketball player, height-wise, is taller than I am. I'm right at 6 feet. Donovan Mitchell, I think, is 6'1". So we just expected something different for a basketball player. Or maybe we're distracted. Today we have all kinds of devices that we're always looking down on, or maybe we're just rushing to our next thing on the to-do list, and we don't notice what's going on around us. I read this really funny story as I was reading this week. It was from a BuzzFeed article, and I'm going to read it to you. It's someone talking about, writing about an encounter that their mom had. They said, my mom is a big sports fan. One time she was shopping and saw a really large, fit-looking man who she didn't immediately recognize, but seemed familiar. She thought it must have been a professional football player or something, so she went up to the only other person in the shop, who was this smaller, weird-looking guy, and asked him if he knew who the athletic-looking man was. The short guy looked at my mom and said, "That's my bodyguard. I'm Elton John." Isn't that funny? That we just don't notice things that are staring us right in the face sometimes because we're distracted by something else, or we just don't recognize what's happening. Jesus became a pretty well-known guy. They didn't have cameras, iPhones and all that kind of stuff, but people followed him. And when he would speak, there would be a crowd. And people didn't necessarily recognize him by the way he looked, but when he started talking, people knew who he was. They understood, oh yeah, this is the guy who said those things. This is the guy who's healed some people. This is the guy who's upset some people. We don't really know what's going on, but we know he healed somebody in that town, so I'm going to bring, my sick friend and lower them to the roof and see what Jesus can do for this person. He was kind of building this reputation, but we're going to read in John 8 this morning about some people who were having a face-to-face conversation with Jesus and knew about him, but didn't recognize him, didn't understand who he was or what he said about himself. As we continue our series, we'll be in John 8, and this is the series, Jesus According to Jesus. The whole purpose behind this series is to explore this question. We've heard a lot of things from the world, from other people about who Jesus is, but what did he say about himself? And what does that mean for us? Who did Jesus say that he is? So we'll be in John chapter 8 this morning, and we'll pick up where we've left off the last couple of weeks, where Jesus has been in Jerusalem for the Festival of Tabernacles. And he's made a couple of controversial claims. And people are a little bit upset at him right now. He's in some hot water because there was this ceremony that they would do every day of this week-long festival, and it involved water. And on the last day, they do this water ceremony, and Jesus says, if anyone is thirsty, let them come to me and drink. And then there was this other ceremony where they would have lights. They would light candles every night. And on the last day of the festival, they don't light the candles. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. He's stirring the pot a little bit. Some people are getting a little bit riled up, and this is kind of where we pick up. Jesus is in some hot water, and a discussion starts between Jesus and some religious leaders, and they start touting their heritage, their family line, and they say, we are sons of Abraham. They're really proud of this fact, that they are descendants of this guy named Abraham. And we're going to talk about who Abraham is in a few minutes. But they're very proud of this fact. And Jesus, as soon as he talks here, you're going to recognize he's addressing that. You say that you're sons of Abraham. So we'll pick up here in John chapter 8, verses 56 through 59. And we'll look at a couple of other places in the Bible this morning too. But here is how Jesus responds in this conversation right after these religious leaders have said, we are descendants of Abraham. We're kind of important people. We're kind of a big deal. He says this, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. You are not yet 50 years old, they said to him, and you have seen Abraham. Now this is an exclamation point in the text here, but not a happy exclamation point where we think of like, happy birthday, exclamation point. This is very accusatory. The people are starting to think this guy is nuts. Abraham died about 2,000 years ago, and here's this guy. They say, you're not yet 50 years old, and they're right. He was probably just over 30 at this time, but they're estimating, I guess. You're not even 50. You haven't seen this guy, Abraham, and he hasn't seen you. How could you possibly know each other, know of each other, know about each other? You could not have met. So they're very accusatory, starting to think probably that Jesus is out of his mind a bit, a little bit crazy, lost his marbles. And he says, very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. Now this word, the original Greek word that's translated here, was born. It's a perfectly good translation. It's a verb that really means to exist, to come into existence. So Jesus says, before Abraham existed, I am. Before Abraham came into being, I am. At this, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. So at first Jesus was in hot water, then this discussion happens, and now he's in really big trouble. And they're trying to kill him. This is what they would do to people who blasphemed against God, who spoke against God negatively or said something false about God or who God was. They would pick up stones and they would throw stones at this person until they killed them. This is what they're about to do to Jesus. Why are they so mad? Why this reaction? And it all starts with who Abraham was. So we're going to go back to the beginning a little bit here of this story, all the way back in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis is the very first book of the Bible. And here's where we learn a bit about Abraham. Now, God changed a man named Abram's name. He renamed him Abraham, and we're about to find out why, because Abraham means the father of many. God gave Abram this new name, Abraham, father of many, and here's why. It'll be up on the screen for you to follow along. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. So there it is, the father of many. And I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God made this promise to Abraham that through Abraham, through his descendants, God was going to bless all the peoples of the world. And Abraham had this joyful, confident hope, this joyful and confident faith that God was going to do what he said he was going to do because God is who he said he is. And Jesus says, Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. Here's the thing we've got to recognize is that when God told Abraham later, I'm going to bless the whole world through you, through your family, through your lineage, through your descendants. Jesus was descended from Abraham. This is God's way in Jesus of blessing the whole world through Abraham's line. That God would himself come in the flesh and live the perfect life that nobody else could live and die the death that everybody else deserved so that he could then rise again and conquer death and conquer the power of sin over us and restore us into a relationship with God. We couldn't manage that on our own. This is how God would bless all people through Abraham. And Jesus picks up on this fact, and he is the ultimate fulfillment of all of Abraham's hopes and all of Abraham's dreams for the world being blessed through his family and all of Abraham's longing and desire and expectation. Jesus is the full, complete fulfillment of all of that. And Abraham knew that God was going to keep his promise to him. And God would keep that promise through Abraham. See, what's so amazing about this promise that God made to Abraham is he didn't have any kids yet. And he was already old, past his years of having kids. And Abraham even told God that. How are you going to do this? I'm old and I don't have kids. But when God made the promise, Abram believed it. And then he did have a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob, and Jacob God changed his name to Israel, which is where we get the name Israelites for his descendants. And then Jacob's descendants eventually were enslaved in Egypt. And God came to Moses, who was also a descendant of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and said, Moses, I want you to go back because you're going to lead my people out of slavery in Egypt into freedom, into a new life. And in Exodus chapter 3, this is the second book of the Bible. I told you we're going back to the beginning today. Verses 14 and 15 says this, God said to Moses, I am who I am. What he's responding to is when Moses said, okay, God, if you're sending me back to these people, and I tell them God spoke to me, they're not going to believe me. What am I supposed to tell them your name is? Who am I supposed to say sent me? And God says to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, here's this family connection, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, all the same God has sent me to you. He says, this is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. And these religious leaders who are standing face to face with Jesus now are one of those future generations. They know this name. They know when Jesus says, before Abraham was born, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. They know he's talking about this. It would have rang in their ears. They would have heard it. And so they get really mad to the point where they want to kill Jesus because they don't believe him. They knew the name. They knew what Jesus was saying about himself, but they didn't think it was true. So when Jesus in John 8:58 says, before Abraham was, I am, it's not this massive God making a grammar mistake. It's a statement to say, that's who I am. I am the same God. Before Abraham was, I am. I am that God. I was there when that happened because that was me. Is what he's saying. Jesus is claiming here to be God. What he's saying is, I was not only there before Abraham, but I was there at the time of the promise when God made the promise to Abraham. I've been the fulfillment all along of this promise. I was there when God came to Moses and said, go and set my people free, lead them out of slavery into freedom. I was there. I was the one who told Moses the name of God because I am God. He's the same God. What I think we need to learn from what Jesus is saying here, because there was this massive breakthrough for the people of God when they were delivered from this oppression and slavery. Jesus says, I'm before the beginning. I'm before all that stuff. Jesus is before the beginning and beyond the breakthrough. He says, I was there before that promise to Abraham. I was there when God came to Moses. I was there when Moses led the people to freedom. I was there when the Red Sea was parted. I am that God. Abraham, I think, knew this. He saw this day when Jesus says, Abraham saw the day that I would come and rejoiced. It's not that he knew Jesus by name, but he knew that the promise was going to be fulfilled. He knew that God was going to bless all the peoples of the world through him, and he rejoiced because God would bring the breakthrough, even if he didn't see it, even if he didn't see it in his lifetime. He believed God to bring the blessing, and God did that through Jesus. I think this is one reason that John, this guy John who wrote this account of Jesus' life that we're reading, I think that is one major reason that he wrote, was to show people that these claims Jesus made, that everybody said, this guy is crazy. He can't be telling the truth. He's either crazy, maybe he's just a liar, but he's a really big liar. I think John is trying to say, yeah, all these claims that people accuse Jesus about, they're actually not so crazy after all. They actually, maybe we need to consider the fact that they are true. John opens up this account of Jesus' life that he's writing. We're going to read John chapter 1, verses 10 and 12, almost all the way at the beginning of what John wrote about Jesus' life. He wrote, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him. So John is making even a bigger claim than before Abraham was, I am. John is saying before the world came into existence, Jesus was there because all of it was created through him. So this is Jesus, creator God, who was there from the start, before time began, before anything existed that exists now. Jesus was there, the eternally existing one. The world was made through him. The world did not recognize him. I think you and I have this problem sometimes, that we get so caught up in what's right in front of us that we don't recognize Jesus. Or we get so caught up in what we're asking Jesus to do over here that we don't recognize the thing that he's doing right in front of us. We get so caught up in everything in our lives that we don't recognize the work he's doing right in our heart. It's the same problem that these religious people had. They were getting so caught up in their identity as sons of Abraham, getting so caught up in what can we do to earn the favor of God? What can we do to maintain this identity as his children? How do we check all the boxes and follow all the rules? They didn't recognize him standing right in front of them. Verse 11, John writes, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. There's a major difference between Abraham and these religious leaders who are face to face with Jesus now. See, Abraham believed God and he trusted him and he did what God said. Remember back in Genesis 12, verse 1, God says, Abraham, I want you to leave your home. I want you to leave your family. I want you to leave your household for something that I'm going to do in the future. And Abraham never got to see the fulfillment of all of that promise in his earthly life. And yet he trusted that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. But here are these people standing face to face with Jesus, and they're just not getting it. They're just not getting it. Like this is the one we've been waiting for. And yet we don't recognize him. We've been waiting for this person. We thought he was going to look this way. And this guy doesn't look like that. So there's Abraham who believed, even though he didn't see. These people saw face to face, but they didn't believe. Remember what Jesus said, how he opened up this part of the conversation. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. So I think Abraham could rejoice at the thought of God fulfilling his promise simply because one day he knew God would keep his word, even if he didn't get to see it. He knew God truly would bless all people through his family. But the fulfillment of all of that was standing face to face with the religious leaders. And see, they knew the promise. They just didn't recognize the answer. They were distracted by something else. I don't know if it was this idea that we had to be so strict to the letter of the law that we actually built laws around it so that we could try to maintain the presence and the favor of God and try to maintain this promise even. But Abraham just knew if we trust God, He'll do it. God said He's going to do something. If we trust Him, He'll do it. They didn't realize the blessing had come. They couldn't see that Jesus was the one who fulfilled it all. They couldn't recognize that Jesus was the one who was before the beginning and beyond the breakthrough. They didn't see this moment as the breakthrough that Abraham had rejoiced about. They thought Jesus was just another man. And yet, according to John, according to what Abraham believed, God's an uncreated one, the uncreated being, not contained by time and space. And this is Jesus. Jesus is claiming, when He says, before Abraham was, I am, He's claiming to be God. He is eternally existing. Hebrews 13:8 says this is a really simple verse. If you're ever looking for a verse to memorize this one. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. He's never changed. He hasn't changed in eternity past. He's not going to change today. He's not going to change in eternity future. He is constant and unchanging. And because He is constant and unchanging, we can trust Him. We worry about trusting each other sometimes because we think, what if something changes? What if that person changes their mind or their heart changes toward me? But Jesus never changes. He's unflinching, unchanging. He's the fulfillment of the promises. And all things find their completion in Jesus. This is part of the whole purpose for this series, is that Jesus is the fulfillment of every partial truth, every hope, every desire. The deepest desires in our hearts. Jesus is the fulfillment. Jesus is before the beginning and beyond the breakthrough. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean today? So we don't want to be like the religious leaders who were literally face to face with the fulfillment of the promise they were longing for, but they missed it. They didn't recognize it. We don't want to miss what God is doing right here, right now. We want to be like Abraham, who even though he didn't get to see it. Jesus lived 2,000 years after Abraham's death, but he believed that God would keep His word in God's time, whatever that meant. So even when we don't see the promises of God coming into reality right before our eyes, even when we don't see it, we can trust that God is good, that His word is good, that He will always keep His word, that He wants to bless us and He wants to bless the world, because that's what He said to Abraham, I'm going to bless the world through you. What this means for us is Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Before you were abused, I am. Before that person abandoned you, I am. I was there. I am constant. I am unchanging. Before you got that diagnosis, I am. Before you got sick, I am, Jesus says. Before you hit rock bottom, I am. Before you hated yourself, I am, is what Jesus says. That is His promise to us. Before your family fell apart, I am. Before everything in your life brought you to your knees, I am. Before all of the stuff that has sucked the life out of you, I am, He says. And even in the midst of it, even right now, in the middle of all of it, in the suffering and the chaos and the pain, I am. Because I don't change. I'm the same yesterday and today and forever. And even in the future, when my promises are fulfilled, even if you don't see it in this physical life on earth, when the breakthrough comes, when I deliver you, Jesus says, I am still. That's the invitation when Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. What He's saying is, come to me and trust me. Your situation It might be terrible. It might suck right now, but your situation will change. I will not. So even when we don't see the breakthrough yet, his promise, I am, means that he is with us. He promises to be with us, that he is present with us. He promises that he is over the situation. He's sovereign over it. He has power over it. He is good in the midst of it. And he promises to make us new. He promises that he will one day set all things right, whether we get to see it in this life or not. That's the hope that we have. That even if we live this whole life and don't get to see the fulfillment of the promises that we're hoping for, we have a life after this one. It's going to last a long time. It's eternal. And his promises are good. This promise, we get impatient after 2 minutes, 2 hours, right? This promise was 2,000 years coming until fulfillment. He's not constrained by time and space. He says, I am. I'm constant. The invitation is to trust him because Jesus is before the beginning and he's beyond the breakthrough. He's the same God who made that promise to Abraham and the same God who fulfilled that promise to Abraham 2,000 years later. He's the same God who promised to bless Abraham, and because of that promise, he has also promised to bless us through Abraham. He's the same God who came to be with us, live the life we couldn't, die the death that we didn't, so that he could restore us to this eternal life, to this eternal relationship with him. And then after Jesus rose from the grave, after he conquered the power of death and the power of sin, he ascended into heaven, and he did what? That he promised his disciples that he would send the Holy Spirit back, the Helper back, to actually come and live inside us. His Spirit lives in us, and here's what that means. It means that breakthrough is not just something that we do. It's certainly not something we do that we can bring about on our own. Breakthrough is not something that we experience. Breakthrough is who we are. It's who God made us to be. He says, if you believe in me, you are my child, and I set my Spirit in you. What that means is we carry breakthrough in the person of Jesus with us, wherever we go. It's who we are. It's who he made us to be. So I believe if we will recognize who Jesus is, that he is before the beginning and he is beyond the breakthrough, and we'll begin living as if the Spirit of the living God actually does live in us. If we'll take hold of that and say, God, I believe in your promise, we'll start to see some breakthrough, right? In our own lives. We'll also carry that wherever we go. I believe that we'll start to see the sick healed. We'll see some hungry people fed. We will see the lonely set in families. We will see a radical move of God changing our community because he's changing us from the inside out and sending us out as his agents to bring his Spirit of breakthrough with us wherever we go. It's not about you and me. It's about the work of God in our community and around the world. That's what he invites us into. He says, before Abraham was, I am. He says, I am the God of new beginnings and the God of breakthroughs. So we're going to take a few moments to respond now. And the reason we do this is because we spend an hour here during the week, and there's 167 more hours every week. And what would this time be worth if we left, happy and spiritually fed, and we did nothing about it in those other 167 hours? This hour wouldn't be worth anything. So we take some time to respond to God, to recognize that he wants to meet with each one of us. He wants to speak specifically to each one of us. And there's going to be 3 questions on the screen. And these are not a checklist. This is not rules that you have to follow. This is not anything like that. This is to help us not live according to a checklist of rules, not live according to the pressure to try to measure up. This is to help us live according to the promise that God has made us. that He is with us, that before and after everything, He is. He remains. He is constant. So here are a few questions that I hope just help you in guiding your time when you talk to God. What causes you to miss who Jesus is and what He's doing? What's got you distracted? What are you so focused in on that you miss what God is doing around you? Where in your life do you need to trust Jesus for breakthrough? What's that thing that you just can't get past? The thing you just can't get over? The thing that is weighing you down? He invites us to trust Him with it. How will you bring Jesus' breakthrough with you wherever you go this week? What does that look like? How will you ask the Spirit to move in you and through you in your interactions this week, the different places that you go? Like I said, these are just, my hope is to help you in this intentional response time where we don't just sit back and close our eyes and rest. Sometimes that's good, but I want to actually use this time to press in and say, God, what are you doing? And if you've never prayed, just start with, hey, God, I'm not sure what to say right now, but I know you're listening, and just trust Him with that. See what He does with that. We'll take a few moments to reflect, and then the band will lead us in a couple of songs to close our time this morning. Let me begin our time to respond to God with a prayer. Lord Jesus, we come to You because You are unchanging. God, we have experienced Your goodness and Your mercy, and we want to experience more of it. God, we believe we can trust You. We believe we can trust You, Jesus, because You are eternal, unchanging, unflinching, unmoving, and You won't move. So we come to You with whatever is going on inside, with our mess, with our broken hearts, with our questions. And God, we just ask You to break through. Pray that we will recognize what You're doing and recognize Your Spirit dwelling within us.